My name is Jennifer Gray Thompson, and I am the CEO of After the Fire. Welcome to the podcast, How to Disaster: Recover, Rebuild, and Reimagine. In this podcast, we bring you the very best practices, best hearts, and great ideas from other disaster-affected communities. Thank you for joining us. So here we are at the end of season 2, and my team has asked if I would actually do some reflections on the podcast and the guests that we've had in season 2, but I would actually have to go all the way back to season 1. You know, we decided to start this podcast because we were in the middle of COVID and we were wondering, how do we stay absolutely productive and serve people in a way that, is non-contact essentially. And I was really motivated to do this podcast because I have met such amazing people along the way. I don't ever love the reason why I show up in a community because it's usually on the basis of pain. I don't necessarily love I don't revel in the disaster itself, but I do sort of swim in the humanity of it. I absolutely crave and adore the side of this podcast that really brings forth the human faces and human stories of who's involved in disaster and how did they get here? And also, how do you do it? Because the one thing that stays exactly the same is until you go through it, you don't really understand it. And the amount that it sort of disrupts your way of thinking. I was thinking about this even last night as I was locking up my house. And right now where I live in Sonoma Valley, it's harvest season. And there was a big harvest moon and I actually can't see it from where I live. But what I could feel is that it was really warm outside and it was a little bit breezy. And I thought about a fire survivor that I met right after our fires who explained to me that when the night of the October 8th, 2017 fires, she and her husband were awakened and, they went downstairs and looked out their window, not thinking really anything was going on. And all of a sudden realizing that they were surrounded by fire. A mega fire, and all they had time to do was grab one cell phone, no shoes, no clothes, and run for their lives. And they had to do that for over a mile on a windy road before a public sector, a police officer actually picked them up and evacuated them. That's a harrowing story. And I was thinking about that last night as I was sort of deciding what part of my house I would shut the windows. And I was thinking about how we live our lives in this way that we absolutely believe that the way our lives look today, that they will also look tomorrow. And the one thing that life teaches us is that that's just not necessarily something you can take for granted. And I think that COVID has absolutely driven that point home for many of us. There are over 670,000 people who have died in the past year, 2 years now. We're going into year 3 pretty soon of COVID. And all of those people had families attached to them. And it's the same in any disaster. Everyone is absolutely affected on a visceral level. And if we can actually be there and show up for humanity in a way that is not political, it's not divisive, nobody reaches out their hands and asks you if you're a Republican or a Democrat or independent before they decide whether or not they're going to rescue you from a collapsed building. They just do it because it's the right thing to do. And that's actually what I love about disaster and sharing these people with you is they do it because it's the right thing to do. And they don't use politics to actually get there. They bypass it or, utilize the influence maybe, but it's not about politics. And it's not about what we don't hold in common. It's always about what we do hold in common. And I hope that you have enjoyed this season of the podcast, How to Disaster. I definitely want to thank Kyle Burnett, who is our podcast producer. He probably has a lot of hot cuts of me, being a little bit mouthy at times. I might have sworn a few times, but only because this is not as easy as it may look, like anything else. But certainly it's important. And he's done a really good job, a great job. And then also Melissa Stone from our team for all of her work with Kyle, and then Lang and her team of editors. And it does take a lot of people to actually get this done. all of us have the common goal of demystifying how it is that you deal with disaster and how can you avoid it and how can you recover from it, and to remind all of you that you are not alone if you're going through a disaster. It can be a personal disaster, it can be a massive disaster, but what we share is humanity, and that's always at the core of what we do. And so thank you once again for your time and your attention and your care for this issue. And this is the podcast ending for a little bit. We'll be back with season 3 of How to Disaster in just a couple of months. Thank you. Thank you for joining us on the podcast, How to Disaster. For more information, please visit our website at afterthefireusa.org. And if you liked this video, please hit subscribe.
This podcast is sponsored by Fire Safe Signs. In a disaster, seconds matter. Fire Safe Signs give first responders critical information like, can a fire truck make it down the driveway? What water sources are available? Fire Safe Signs help property owners provide crucial information to first responders, and they're made in the USA. Getting this information in seconds helps save lives. Together, we make our community safe. Visit us today at firesafesigns.com.